Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Luis Ortega. I'm the director and founder of Storytellers for Change. And we believe the best way to practice storytelling is not so much by reading, by writing. That plays a role. At one point, you just have to get up and do it. So having said that, I'm going to invite you. I have a very experiential approach to my workshop. So I'm going to invite all of us to stand up, to engage in an experiential learning activity. You don't need nothing with your hands. So just yourself, your beautiful self, step on up. We're going to make a circle. And you kind of want to sort of flap your arms like a chicken a little bit. And you should comfortably like kind of close to people, but not so close that you will be like an awkward chicken. You want to be like a comfortable sort of like chicken. Perfect. We might have to like throw it a little bit closer. So. That's still not awkward. That's close enough. Perfect. So very simple activity. You just do as I do. A quick disclaimer. I went hiking yesterday and I hurt my hand. There's some clapping in the beginning, so my clapping is going to sound a little weak, but you give everything that you have when you're doing your clapping, all right? So just follow along. Alrighty. With instructions this time. Clap twice. Clap twice. Check them low. Check them high. Right hand up. Left hand to the side. 1, 2, 3. Doop. Oh, sound effects. 1, 2, 3. Doop. All right. So the name of this activity, which is really a story, is chili pepper. And every time I tell you the word chili pepper, you are going to have to do two things at the same time. You have to try to capture somebody's finger and avoid being captured. Every time you hear the word apple, you don't do anything. Bananas, nothing. Chili pepper. And it's kind of unfair because you're next to me. So we'll see how that goes. All right, set it up. So are you ready? Oh, join us, please. Step in. So my name is Luis Ortega, as I told you all already, and I was born and raised in Mexico City. But Seattle has been my home for the last 16 years. And I want to tell you about my high school graduation gift. My mom spent all her money to buy me this one thing. She had been saving for it for about 3 years. It was an airplane ticket to go to a place called Chicago. Oh, come on. There's not a place called Chili Pepper. Good job. All right, check your hands. So for those of you that just joined us, I'll loop you in right now. So clap twice. Check them low. Check them high. Right hand up, left hand to the side. 1, 2, 3. Boop. All right. So I'm telling a story, and every time I say the word chili pepper, you have to do two things at the same time. You have to try to capture somebody's finger and avoid being captured. Yeah, he's like, oh, whoa, what? You got this. So Chicago, yeah. So who here has been to Chicago? Anyone? Yeah. What's your favorite thing about Chicago?
Chili pepper.
I guess.
What was that?
The bean.
Yeah. I love the architecture. The museums were fun. My grandma was there during the time, and I went to see her. The hot dogs. Oh man, those made an impression on me. Because they put some things on those hot dogs that are just so yummy. Like the onions and the tomatoes. And the buns have poppy seeds. Mustard, never ketchup, and chili peppers. All right. Check your hands. Clap twice. Check them low. Check them high. Right hand up, left hand to the side. 1, 2, 3. Boop. All righty. So I'm going to try to trick you. I'm letting you know ahead of time. Chihuahua. Okay. Oh, good. Oh, you're ready. Chimichanga. Okay, good. Bananas. Sounds nothing like chili pepper. I know. Check your hands. Right hand up. High five 5 people. Tell them, thank you for being here. Let's sit down. Let's talk about this activity, and let's get this started. Ready, set, go. High five 5 people. And I'm going to do it with my left hand. High five, high five, high five. High five. High five. Perfect.
Good. One more for you.
One more for me. Sounds good. Let's go ahead and sit down. All right. So welcome to our storytelling workshop, Getting to Action, the art and power of storytelling. And believe it or not, this activity, deceptively simple, but this activity holds what I think are some of the most powerful lessons I've learned over 12 years of storytelling. So let's build some metaphors. And you can name them, as you name them, I'll tell you what I think this activity has to teach us about good storytelling. So what was the first thing that we did in the activity? We stood up, yeah. So stories get us to stand up, right? To get us moving into action. What else? What did we do then? How did we organize ourselves? In a circle. I love the metaphor of a circle from the perspective of a story has to be accessible. And when I think of a circle, I cannot think of anything more accessible than that. Like, we can clearly see each other. You can see me, I can see you. There's connection, right? When I'm sharing a story, whether it's in front of 5 people or 10,000 people, I aim to share a story not to a group, right, but to each individual, right? Because my story has to be accessible to the person that's sitting all the way in the back or the person that's sitting right in front. That's good storytelling. It has to be accessible. Now, I did not go to tell you instructions verbally at first. I showed you. Right, what needed to happen. And the best stories show. They don't tell. They show. Right? So story showing, not storytelling. Because you describe it. You paint a picture with words. Right? You don't demand for people to listen to your story. You invite them to do it. Right? And you make it easy to follow. Right? You start with just something simple, then something more complex. And then you can have fun with it if you want to. Right? And then you can kind of tell people what was the instructions around it, what was the other words, the other follow-up items. Eventually, I bet you that a couple of you, after a couple times of us doing this, we're ready to lead. And we're ready to say, hey, can you just walk us through that? And you would have known, okay, yeah, we clapped twice, and I think we check height, this. Stories teach, all right? And they're easy to follow. Stories build harmony, right? Stories get us all to focus, to come together, and eventually, boop, to connect. And even if it's just the tiniest of connection, connection is connection, period. All right? And then once we arrive there, what are we doing? Well, is this everlasting, what I call these like 2 questions that we just have to always tackle and address throughout our entire lives. What are the things that we're going after and that we're trying to hold on to, or the things that we value, and in that journey, what are the things that could hold us back or trap us or keep us away from achieving something? The greatest stories that have ever been told throughout human history tackle those 2 questions. Whether we were pursuing knowledge or treasure, fire, saving someone, saving ourselves, and in that journey, the things, the perils, the trials that could have trapped us and kept us from getting there, that's stories right there, time and again. Anyone here familiar with the hero's journey? Joseph Campbell's The Hero of a Thousand Faces? A very, very, very powerful storytelling framework. Joseph Campbell began to notice as he studied different mythologies across the world that all of them follow a very similar pattern. That time and again, those that we held in the highest regards, those that we call heroes or sheroes, they follow a very similar journey. It will all start with a hesitant call to action. And you could think of these, whether you're thinking about Star Wars or Harry Potter or thinking about Hercules. All across our cultures, it always happens with an initial invitation to do something that's different, that makes us a step out of the box. That's why the adventure begins. Call to adventure, right? So we step into an unknown world. And as we do that, we're learning. We are beginning to engage on a quest, if you will. This is where we have to develop new skills. We meet people along the way, mentors. They teach us things. And all of that is so that one day we'll be able to face a difficulty, a struggle, the trials. And usually there's a low point, there has to almost be a low point, right? Could you imagine a movie like Finding Nemo where Nemo never gets lost? There wouldn't be a story, right? Nemo has to get lost, right? He has to. But then eventually Nemo also has to find the dad, right? You don't want to find I was working with a group of teachers the other day, and I was like, what if like at the end of Finding Nemo, the dad died or something like that? You don't want to hear that story either. So you have to be intentional about how you craft these things. And after the trials, eventually there's a resolution, right? There's a return to something. And then how you express and tell that story teaches other people how to go about it in their own lives. It's everywhere. So you are a storyteller already. Because believe it or not, I bet you if I sat down with each one of you and we just did like a quick sort of storytelling interview that from time to time we do with people and we began to write some things down, I could create a hero's journey for you. I could draw it out and I could see how these things play out in your life. I want to talk to you about how to identify those patterns and how to craft them into a story. And there's 3 steps to this. So we believe the storyteller, you, has to do 3 essential, or has to master rather 3 essential skills. Story listening. So we believe before even you want to start sharing a story, you have to get really good at listening, because empathetic listening is what allows us to better understand people. And the more you understand people, you understand what drives them and what moves them. And the more you understand that, the more you can be intentional about your language. So that's going to be a fundamental piece of knowing how your story can make a difference. The more you know the people or your audience, the more you'll know how to share something with them that will compel them. Then there's a story crafting. This is understanding the story arc. So what's point A, point B, point C? There's one specific storytelling framework that we'll be using today that gets you to talk about a challenge that you face, the choices that you made in response to that challenge, and eventually how through those choices you were able to get to a place of change where you can make a call to action. More of that later. And then eventually there's just storytelling, the act of sharing. And you have to practice and practice often. Why? Because practice makes, but it doesn't. Good practice makes perfect. Practice makes permanent. So you have to be also intentional in what you are practicing and how you are practicing your storytelling, right? So my hope is that today I will be providing you with some tools that will help you to figure out what is that good practice and what does that look like. So let's start with a very simple question. What moves you? Or what gets you to action? So I guarantee you, every single one of you at one point in your life, you've been in a place where you heard something or saw something that made you want to just get up. Whether it was seeing someone in need or whether it was a stranger or a family member, hearing someone or just hearing a story that maybe didn't move you physically, but internally it made you shiver or you were shaken, right? It's happened to you. And the more you get in tune with that and what moves you, right? And because that's what you want to channel. When you are speaking, if you don't feel like you're moving inside, that's not the story you should be sharing. That's just something we've learned over time. And what we do at Storytellers for Change, because one of our core fundamental beliefs is that stories move people. More than anything else, stories move people. So we've really studied movement and we've tried to the very best of our ability to break it down. To understand that there are things that keep people from moving, right? Being passive, being divided, reactive, apathy, fear. And as we study the things that prevent movement, we also start realizing that there are sort of mirror opposites to them, right? So as we tell stories, we aim to activate, to unite, to give people a sense of purpose, initiative, to turn fear into courage. It's not that these feelings are bad, by the way, or that it's just you have to acknowledge them. Like fear, for example, I talk a lot about that. I think fear is a necessary and universal feeling. I wouldn't want to see a world without fear, but I do want to see a world where we can overcome it. And the way you do that is by telling a story where you show people that there are things more important than their fear. And it's not that fear's absent, just that courage overcomes it, right? And you can tell a story about that. I bet you've had an experience like that. You just have to channel it, find it. And that's our role. That's your role as the storyteller. So I love that you're going to be hearing from Eric Liu later today. I absolutely love him. I love his work, his books, his talks. There's this talk that he has about power, and he breaks it down. What is power? So there's legislative power, the power of violence, the power of money, the power of numbers, the power of social norms, the power of ideas. And I think that's beautiful and amazing. And I like to talk about the power of story. Because the way I think about stories is that compared to legislative power or money power or the power of violence, even the power of numbers, which takes time to build, story is very accessible. Because you have it, it's yours. No matter who you are in this world, you have a story to tell. To be a human is to be a storyteller. And how you access that and channel it can give you a lot of empowerment. It can get you to move people. So here's where I want to start in terms of identifying your power and empowering you to believe in your story. Three simple questions that I think are fundamental before you begin your journey as a storyteller. It comes from a model by Simon Sinek. Some of you may be familiar with him, very popular TED speaker. He wrote this book called Start With Why. And his concept was deceptively simple yet incredibly powerful. What inspires people? And what communication style in particular inspires people. And what he realized as he began to study how we just communicate overall is that more often than not, people are very used to talk from the outside in, as he describes it. So a way of thinking about this, and for a second, I want you to just think about your own educational journeys. As far back as kindergarten, elementary, middle school, high school, undergrads, if you've gone into master's, PhDs, more often than not, throughout that journey, the way you were talked to about your education was this way. You were always told what to do. I bet you, like always. Not always, most of the time, depends on the school, you were shown how to go about doing things, right? That's the whole learning process. You'd be surprised how many of our schools actually just work on this idea that we just should tell people what to do and that's it. Some of them show you how to do it. Rarely ever anyone actually had an honest conversation with you about why your education mattered. In my 16 years of education that I've gone through, and this is just institutional education I'm talking about, right? Discounting other type of education outfits that are out there and ways of learning. In 16 years, I could just think of one teacher that had an honest conversation with me about why my education mattered within the context of who I was as a human being, including the intersectionalities of my identities, right? Like as a male, as an immigrant, as someone from Mexico, like all of those things, like just one in 16 years that had an honest conversation about why something mattered to me. But guess who was the teacher that made the greatest difference in my life? The one that empowered me, the one that asked me to think about why. Purpose. So why do you want to tell a story? Why do you want to share your story? And this is not like one of those things that you answer it, and once you answer it, it's like, oh, I'm done. No, it's an ongoing process, right? It's reflection, time and again. Why do we do the things that we do, right? And when you start thinking about this, it makes a lot of sense how talking about our values and our purpose and our experiences that drive us, the why of our lives and the why of the work that we do, compels us to feel connected, right? It moves us. And when you speak with that type of passion, this is a part that you cannot teach because it comes from within you. I could teach you sentence structures, and I could teach you like all kinds of blueprints and frameworks, but if you don't have the passion to share the story, it's not going to work. I've seen amazing storytellers who craft every single word the perfect way, and their timing is impeccable, and their body language is perfect, and they get up there and they make it look so easy. And I've seen storytellers who get up there, and you can tell that they're struggling every second that they stood in front of you, and yet those are the ones that more often than not touch me the most. Because it's clear that they're uncomfortable, and yet it's clear that they have a reason to be up there. They communicate their purpose. It's amazing when you see that. Compel the heart by answering why. The how is the rationalization, right, of the process. The what is the call to action. The heart, the head, and the hands. So this is where your process starts. We just get out a blank piece of paper and fill in the blanks here. What is the story that you want to tell, and why is it that you're trying to tell that story? What is the objective? So I'll just give you a few examples to kind of get things going here, to brainstorm a little bit. So it could be that you're telling a story to convince someone to give you some funding or compel a donor, right, to invest in your cause. It could be about bringing people together. That's a type of storytelling that we're working on a lot right now. We get a lot of calls from people saying, we're working in communities that are not used to talk to each other. How do we tell stories that help us overcome that? How do we tell a story that invites us to put biases aside or judgments aside for a moment and come together? And my favorite type of story, the stories that teach people how we go about overcoming obstacles, the stories about resilience. And those are my favorite because that's how I got started in my own storytelling, by speaking quite a bit about that. Now, this is the next piece that's crucial, and this is where we go back to the listening piece. Who is your audience, right? And there's 4 key questions that we ask ourselves about our audience that help us to better understand how our story should be designed to move them, to compel them. Emotions, right? The thoughts and beliefs that will resonate with them, keywords and defining quotes that will resonate with them, and eventually, what are the actions that we want them to make, right? We have to be intentional about this. This is a brainstorming process, right? None of this happens in isolation. Very rarely, your storytelling will start with just you and a journal and a typewriter or a laptop. I don't know how many people use typewriters anymore, but I do. It's something that's going to happen in a group setting, right? So my team and I, when we're looking at a new audience, a new story, we'll sit down and we'll put together an empathy map to help us develop this. So this is the tool that we use. We start saying, okay, so this is our audience, whether it's teachers, seniors in high school, a new group of funders, a particular community. What feelings and emotions do we need to tell them that will compel them to eventually get to this place? But then we go through this process, right? So we start with, okay, what are the feelings and emotions that we're aiming for? What are the thoughts and beliefs that this audience has, right? What is their current mindset? We keep that in mind. What are the quotes and defining words that we think will resonate with them and they will be using to describe our stories? And then what are the actions and behaviors that we want them to take on? So this is a very standard marketing tool. An example that I like to use to describe the power of these is Nike. So what is the brand of Nike? What's their slogan? Just do it. Yeah, I mean, I've talked with people from all kinds of different places across the country, and I've never encountered an audience where not at least one person can tell me, just do it. It's universal, right? And brands are stories, right? That's what they are. But it's just do it. It's not just buy my shoes, right? Or just like come over here and do this. Like, it's just do it, which directly appeals to the heart because it's about empowerment, and all the images and everything that they told you and showed you as a story, as a brand, is aiming directly so that in your heart you believe that you can do something, right? And because they want you to believe that, they want you to actually see yourself, right? To start thinking and believing it, right? Not just feeling, believing it, that if you buy that pair of shoes, you'll get out there and run, right? And you'll get out there and start doing this. And you'll start saying it, and once you start saying something, you're just this far away from doing it. And that's why you pay $100 for a pair of shoes. Or not you maybe, but other people do. And that's their audience, and that's who they speak to when they tell that story. And over time, I don't know if you know the evolution of the Nike brand, but when it first started, it was like Nike and the check mark, and it looked kind of like weird and awkward. You can Google this. And over the years, you see how like it went evolving into eventually now it's just the check mark. It doesn't even say Nike. They don't have to. Their story tells it already. They just show you that check mark, and you know it means empowerment, you know it means just do it, you know it means Nike, you know it means buy my shoes. But for us, right, we don't sell a product. What we are after is a story that will move people, all right, into action. That's what we want. So once you know your audience, this is where I want to spend some time with you today, because getting to know your audience, this is a process that, as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure many of you already know your audience. Maybe you just have to spend some time sitting down and doing some of the empathy mapping and doing some interviews with them too, and checking in with them to see if your interpretation of what works for them, you know, their feelings, their thoughts, etc., actually matches what they tell you. So you can do that process. But this is the actual crafting of the narrative. And I'm going to invite all of you to actually engage in this exercise by practicing it. So you can bring your notebook along if you want to take notes as you go, but sometimes it really just works better to just like let yourself go into the activity. So we're gonna go ahead and stand up, and we're gonna walk around. So you're in a moment here, you're gonna be like kind of like mingle, 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 walk around. And in a moment, I'm gonna be like back to back, and whoever's closer to you, you're gonna get back to back with that person. And then I'll tell you what is the question you need to answer at that point. Ready, set, go. Walk around, mingle, 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 walk around, walking, walkie. Okay, back to back. Here's the first question that I have for all of you. Can you name a challenge that you've experienced? And let's add some focus to this. Let's say within your work, all right? However you may define that currently. Within your work, can you name a challenge? And don't just name it, like describe it. What did it feel? What was it? When did it happen? Where? Why? Go into those details. Now here's the challenge to that question. You only have 1 minute. So tallest person will start first, and then we'll switch over and have the other person go first. Ready, set, go. Turn around, and cheers, your minute starts right now. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and time. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, snap your fingers 3 times. I cannot snap my fingers right now. All right. So here's what we're going to do. Each time, we're going to do this 2 more times. And each time, I'm going to add a different question. But the challenge is that you're still going to have to answer the first question, but in less time. So it's all going to be about finding the right words and the right sentences that you feel actually describe your experience. All right? So go ahead and say, thank you, partner. And walk around, and you're going to switch to another partner. So walk around. Caminando, walk around. I know. And back to back. We're going to have a trio somewhere in there. All right. So here's the next question. All right. So, and maybe you began doing this already, because we cannot help ourselves. When we start talking about challenges, we can also want to talk about like, what do we do about them and all of that? Well, now is the time to really expand on that. So let's break this down. This time you have 1.5 minutes. Now, you should plan to only spend about 30 seconds talking about the challenge. And now where you really want to spend some more time is in talking about the choices, right? How do you respond to those challenges? And the key here is to talk about values, right? To talk about like, I believe in these, or I value these, or growing up, I learned these, and because of that, I knew how to respond to these, right? So this is when you draw from other parts of your life experience to talk about how you responded to those challenges. It could also be about someone else coming in and helping you with that, right? Sometimes our stories are not just about ourselves. Actually, rarely ever they are just about ourselves. So what is the challenge? And then what are the choices? And choices is values that you had to make to respond to that challenge. All right? 1.5 minutes. This time we'll start with the shortest person in the group. And ready, set, go. Turn around. Start. 1.5 minutes. And time. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, snap your finger once. Boom. All right. So go ahead and say, thank you, partner. And walk around. We're going to do this 1 more time. Walk around. And back to back. All right. So this is it right here. So this time, you're going to have 2 full minutes. 2 full minutes to share what we call a narrative for change. All right? And a narrative for change involves 3 parts. About 45 seconds talking about your challenge, right? What is that struggle that you faced? And to describe it, right? Remember, it's important to talk about how it felt when you were in that place. Then the next 45 seconds are all about describing how you responded to that challenge. So this is when you talk about choices, right? So one thing is talking about how a challenge made you feel. I'll give you a quick example. So when I was a senior in high school and I disclosed my immigration status as undocumented to my counselor, she told me that someone like me should never go to college. And she actually kicked me out of her office. And I remember like my heart just like feeling like it was about to burst. And like my stomach was empty. That's visceral, right? I'm telling you and I'm feeling it. Now, choices, right? Well, growing up, mi abuelita, my grandmother, at the most random of times will just pull me over to the side and say, hijo, la gente se convierte en las historias que cuentan sobre su propia gente. People become the stories they tell about themselves. At the most random of times, except over time, I learned that it was never random. It was very intentional when she would choose to say this to me. And that day when I came back to school, and she saw that something was wrong with me, she didn't say, come here, like everything's gonna be like, she just took me by the arm and said, you become the story you tell. I applied to college the very next day. I went to college the very next day. And I spent every day at college making sure that other undocumented students knew that they could do it too. That's 2 minutes right there. That's challenge, that's choice, that's change, all right? So challenge, visceral, how did it feel? Choice, what calls you to make those choices? How do you respond to those things? It's about values, it's about beliefs, it's about, the ways we go about behaving, right, in the world and how we respond to those moments of difficulty. And then the change piece, which is where you are going to spend these last 30 seconds of your 2 minutes, is all about describing how that experience taught you something. That's driving you now to do a project, that's driving you now to do, to think about a problem differently, that is now making you think, I have to invite people to do something else. Maybe you yourself change in a way and you are like now committed to a new cause. What changed? And because of what changed in your life, what change is possible out there as well, right? So it's also about inviting other people to do it too. 2 minutes. After those 2 minutes, you'll have some time to just talk with each other, to give each other feedback after you have your 2 minutes, okay? So let's give it a try. We'll start with tallest person. We'll go back to the tallest person. Ready, set, go. 2 minutes. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and time. If you can hear me, okay, you can hear me, perfect. So go ahead, switch. 2 minutes start right now. If you can hear me, snap your fingers once, twice. Cool. Now, we're going to do something a little bit different for this last round because you just had an opportunity to share your whole story arc from challenge to choice to change. And I want to give you some time for feedback. So take 2 minutes just with each other. And this time, I'm not going to tell you when to switch. This is a conversation, so you guide it. But you have 2 minutes to just give each other feedback on what you just heard. So 2 minutes start right now. That's our storytelling process right there. We do this, and we do this often, and time and again. We practice, and each time we practice, we refine the language that we use. We discover what works for us, what doesn't work for us, what feels comfortable. And it is really through that last portion, when you start getting feedback, that we start really beginning to land on what ultimately would be the story that we do. Right after we do some of these sessions that we practice, and again, we practice them very often, we sit down and then we do some reflection time. Ideally, with more time, what I will invite you to do if you choose to take this model and practice it as part of your work with some friends or colleagues, right after you do this and you hear some feedback, sit down, and that's when you want to do some writing on your own. You want to reflect a little bit, and then take that for a spin, right? Just get up and try it again eventually. And ideally, your narrative will do that, right? Will get you to overcome barriers and will help you to communicate how you went from a place of struggle, right? Will build empathy with your audience as you are speaking about this. Will get them to make a commitment to believe in an action or a project and how that can directly affect change. I just want to show you briefly a couple more slides, which, by the way, I will make my slideshow available to all of you. So there's a couple more things here that I just want to make sure that I note before we transition into doing evaluations here. These are just some of the things that I love to encourage people to think about when you eventually do get to that place where it's all about sharing. The one that I'm going to emphasize, this one has done amazing things for me, just finding my favorite storytellers and looking for videos of them or attending their events as much as I can. And when I say storytellers, sometimes for me, that's been observing just a kindergarten or a third grader sharing their stories, which there's just something so refreshingly human and just vulnerable and honest about how kids share their stories. So think about that. And it also like just very well seasoned, like they do this for a living, 200 days a year, all they do is share stories. Find them, and the ones that called you, just watch them often. This is a time to take a picture because this is how you get a hold of the slideshow and also just some worksheets that we use quite a bit at Storytellers for Change. If you just go to our website, Storyteller Toolkit, and password ArtPlace 2017, you can download the condensed version of this slideshow. It just spares you a couple slides that you won't need. And you will also be able to download a PDF document that walks you through some of the exercises that we did here today as a group. Did everyone get that? I wanted to get it. Just want to make sure before I transition. Perfect. Once you download it, you'll see these are just some useful links to some of the different concepts that I brought up in today's presentation. And I leave you with a picture of my beautiful grandmother, who always reminded me that we become the stories we tell about ourselves. So with that, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to spend this morning with you. And I believe we have to do some evaluations.
Yeah, no, just a very quick announcement. Hi, everyone. I'm Lila from ArtPlace. Just want to make sure that if you guys can, to rate the session in your guidebook app and to make sure you're running to your next session. But really just wanted to thank you so much.
Thank you, Lila.
So
Yeah.
we could all give you a
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.